Today we have another phenomenal founder story. Today we're going to talk with Sam. Sam and I are LinkedIn buddies. I've been following Batch's story for basically ever since they started. And what you guys have, which is so incredible, is that you have a slightly different business model than the usual fashion brands. And so this is what we want to dive into and we want to unpack today. Do a little introduction about yourself and what you do.
Thank you, firstly, for having me on the podcast. We are LinkedIn buddies, have been for a while. As an introduction, my name's Sam. I started a business called Batch London, and we're a made-to-order fashion brand focused in the smart casual space. And our first product is Redefine the Suit. So taking what has become an outdated formality, the traditional suit that no one really wears anymore, because it's fucking uncomfortable and really the number of occasions that you would wear it to are diminishing. So we've taken that and transformed it into something new, something that still gives you that same emotion that everyone likes when you put on a suit. Like, it's true, when you first put it on, you feel sort of confident and elevated and smart and put together. But taking that same emotion, putting it into something that has a lot more freedom of expression. You can dress it up to look smart or dress it down to look casual, wear just the jacket or just the trousers. Really something that you can wear to every occasion, but any occasion that you want to look good, but retain that comfort that you get from wearing tracksuits. Someone described it as smart pajamas the other day, which I really liked. I was like, I'm stealing that, thank you. That's sort of me, and I'm sure we'll dive into it in a lot more detail throughout the podcast. But that's
you haven't been up and running for many years. You started a couple of years ago together with your co-founder Julian, and before you started, because you've also previously you have other entrepreneurship experiences, but when you were in that startup phase or in the ideation phase, why did you start the brand? Why did you think that this is a really brilliant idea? We need to do this. People in this world need our products. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had a slightly different journey into the fashion space than I think a lot of people that end up starting fashion brands, in that I had no experience whatsoever. Julian didn't really either. He was working for an underwear company that was, sort of mass producing underwear with a charitable side to it. It's called the Oddballs, and the Oddballs Foundation, which is all about testicular cancer and testicular cancer awareness. I'd come from the drinks world, so I was working for a drink startup called Punchy, and sort of learned. We both had lots of learnings and understanding about startups, but not very much about fashion and how fashion works. So for me, the entry point was I needed a casual suit, or I wanted a casual suit, and I couldn't find any good ones. And I think, like most good ideas start, it's a problem that you have, that you want to...
Scratching your own itch.
Exactly. So I rolled around with this idea at barbecues and dinner parties and spoke about it, sort of put it out to the world for 4 months and got some relatively positive feedback. Not all, but relatively positive, to be like, okay, hang on a minute. I think we might be onto something here. Brought Julian on board. We started talking about the idea in a bit more detail and realised that actually there was a sort of changing environment that needed this casual suit. The way we dressed to work had changed significantly. We've gone from this very formal in the office 5 days a week to post-COVID a lot more hybrid, and in and out of the office, the way we dressed to work had changed significantly. But again, post-COVID, we in the UK and like probably most of the world had been locked down, and then suddenly we got released out into pubs and bars and clubs again. There was this natural transition towards wanting to look a bit sharper, a bit smarter, but still retain that comfort of being sat at home in our tracksuits. So I realised the timing of this was really strong, was really great. There was a very obvious sort of need for it in our eyes, a need that we then needed to go and improve. But in our eyes, we saw this gap in the market that no one was really fulfilling and owning. And then we started looking into the fashion industry in a bit more detail, and you quickly realise what an unsustainable mess it is. And this is coming from two blokes that weren't making conscious fashion choices, probably weren't making very conscious choices in most of our life, but particularly in the fashion space. And so we wanted to drill into that. And like, when you start looking at some of the stats, where, you know, we're at a point now where 6 in 10 items of clothing that are made end up in landfill within a year, which is obviously fucking mental. Like, the stat doesn't make any sense that can be the way that the world works, or the fashion industry works. And, you know, by 2025, by 2050, 25% of the world's carbon credits will be used up by the fashion industry, which is second only to oil. It's like, hang on a minute. Think about all these industries out there. It's crazy.
But you started, and you didn't really have a background in the fashion industry. You said your friend had been working with underwears, but I'm thinking the products you started with, they're not the easiest products. It's not a t-shirt. So how did you go about this coming into starting a clothing brand and starting with fairly advanced styles? You don't have any design background. How do you go about that to start creating these products?
Yeah, it's a good point. But like, I think the world's got enough t-shirt brands, to be honest. So like, we've got a very business mind, and that didn't make any, like, that angle doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, it's already a massively competitive space. You've got to do something a little bit different if you're going to stand any chance of making a success out of it. So yeah, the casual suit is where we started. It was really interesting going into it because in my mind, you take an idea to someone that knows how to do these things, the fashion design and pattern cut and whatever, and they just make it. But actually, when you start doing it, as you guys will know, as designers and being in the fashion space, you've got your fashion designer, you've got your pattern cutter, you've got your grader, you've got someone that samples, there's someone else that produces it, and the whole thing's broken apart. And still to this day, it doesn't quite make sense to me why no one wants to take a few of those things and do those together as a single individual. But everyone's very much in their lane and they've got their skill set and they just stick in that space. And there's not really much crossover from fashion designers to pattern cutters or the other way around. So we sort of took a few different items that we had in our wardrobe and worked out, like, we like this bit from that and we like this bit from that, and this fits really well, but it looks like shit. How do we put these two things together? And then got amazing freelance fashion designer on board, a lady in London called Christina Chin. She then took this idea that we had and was like, that's a reality, that's not a reality. Let's tweak this. Let's put this on paper. She helped us put it on paper, and then we went to a pattern cutter who cut out the pieces, and it was just a process of trial and error to begin with. It was like, this works, this doesn't. We were quite lucky that we got to, particularly on the men's side, we got women's suits and men's suits. Particularly on the men's suits, we got to that sort of not quite perfect, but we got to that product that we were happy with relatively quickly. Sort of probably 5 or 6 different iterations before we're like, cool, we're good, this is good, this is great.
How long did that take you from when you were like, okay, let's have the designer sketch this out, and you were looking at different materials, you looking in your own wardrobe to make sure that you find pieces that you kind of want to combine, until you actually had the final product? How long did that take you?
So we registered the business in July 2021. Then September, we did our first sort of session with Christina and lots of other products and materials and whatnot. And then we launched it in May of 2022. So it was 10 months from registering the business to launching, and then whatever, I can't do the math on the top of my head, but
that's quite impressive from not coming from the background and done this before to do it that quickly. Yeah,
I think it was personality traits with that one. I mean, both Julia and I were working full time in other businesses at the time. we were both still in our startups as well. So it was pretty mental, but I guess we're both quite impatient to a certain degree, and quite driven. And it was just like, okay, this is what we need to do. Let's work out how to do it. Let's break it down step by step. Let's go and ask lots of people. I think there's a bit of a superpower not having come from the fashion industry before, because I think there is a certain level of...
Because you don't have the blinders.
And then I was thinking about, did you from the beginning, Anna did in the introduction say that you have a different business model? Was this in your plan? And what we're talking about here is made to order. Yeah. Did you know that you wanted to do it this way from the beginning, or did you come to that conclusion in some other way?
No, I knew that's how I wanted to do it from the beginning. And again, I think part of that was, it became our why, the sustainability motive, where wasn't really the initial premise to doing it. It was like, that's cool, that's sustainable, this is something we need to solve, we want to try and change consumer habits, we want to try and get people shopping better, we want to shop better and we don't know how, this is not very obvious, like, is it greenwashing, is it not, where do you start? So like, most people just put their head in the sand and ignore it and just carry on doing what they're doing because it's cheap or whatever. But the initial sort of premise was coming from a consumer product good industry, the drinks industry, where cash flow is such a struggle. So it was a much more of a business mindset of like, I don't want to go into another business where you're constantly having to raise money to produce stock, where you have to pay your manufacturer 2 months ahead of time, and then you get your stock. And even if you were to be able to sell it all straight into a supermarket, they want 120-day payment terms. You've got 5 months where you're just in this cash hole, and it's actually in reality way longer than that, because it might take you 3, 4, 5, 6 months to sell the product, or the stock, let's say. So I just was like, I don't want to do that again. There must be a better way of doing things. Then became aware of this made to order model. It was actually through a brand called Painter, who make jackets. They're such a great brand. They sort of very much in the UK pioneered that space.
Yeah.
And so wanted to sort of emulate them but more from a business perspective than from a sustainability perspective. And then, like I said, then as soon as you start looking into the industry, it's like, oh my God, this needs to change.
Yeah.
So what's the time now from order to delivery to the customer, and what's their how do they react? What's the reaction from the customers when you say that this is going to be produced now and then you're going to get delivered?
Yeah, so it's 4 to 8 weeks at the moment. As we scale and the business gets bigger and we're selling more, that time will come down. At the moment, it's 4 to 8 weeks. We always thought our biggest challenge in this would be convincing people to buy something and wait for it. And that still remains a challenge, don't get me wrong, but that hasn't really presented itself as the biggest challenge at the moment. The biggest challenge is fighting to get awareness in a space that's massively over competitive. But as it turned out, it was because we had a strong value proposition in what we were selling, because we were selling suits, which again is something that instinctively we're used to buying and waiting. If you tried to do it with the t-shirt market, it's too hard to derive why you'd get significantly more value from buying a made-to-order t-shirt than buying something that you could walk out the shop with. Whereas what the made-to-order model has allowed us to do, and I think this is where it becomes really interesting, and how you take it from this nice idea that sustainable people buy into something that's much more accessible to the masses, is you get a much higher quality item for a lot less, because I'm not having to account for holding stock, for wastage. So if you were to buy our suit off the shelf, it would cost somewhere in the region of £1,000, but we sell it for 395. So it's a much more compelling argument to say to someone, are you willing to wait 4 to 8 weeks to save 600 quid? Like, yeah, that sounds great. Versus, are you willing to wait 4 to 8 weeks to save the planet? It's like, could do, but like, when it actually comes to spending your money, price and quality are the two driving factors, not sustainability. Sustainability falls right down the bottom of the list. And we actually validated that with some market testing, which showed that was the case. But people really care about price and quality. So this made-to-order model allowed us to deliver that. So when it then comes to waiting for it, it didn't really matter whether people were waiting 4 weeks, 8 weeks, or we had a batch that went wrong for several different reasons. But the way that we were dyeing it was garment dyed, and that just led to loads of problems. But it was 12 weeks late for a lot of people, in some cases 16 weeks late. They were waiting 12 weeks or 16 weeks, and actually people didn't really care. We knew with this order was 200 different suits we were making, and we had 2 returns because it was too late. And it's like, which I think goes to show that once you've committed to buying something and waiting for it, as long as you're kept updated on the process and the journey, and you understand why it's late or what's gone wrong, it wasn't really an issue. People have committed to it at that stage, and it only presents itself an issue when mostly men, I have to admit, we've got a shop in Spitalfields, and they come running in and they're like, I've got a wedding this weekend. And you're like, well, that's stupid, isn't it? Like, why are you trying to buy clothes for it 3 days before your wedding?
Go rent one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So did you need with this business model, did you need external funding when you started out, or did you manage to get it started without that?
I think with the business model, you need less external funding.
Yeah.
That aside, though, starting a business is an expensive thing to do. Like, I think there's a bit of a misconception that you can just like, oh, just make a brand now, and this is what my logo looks like. And like, you can do it cheaply, you can do it slowly, but as you guys will know, but maybe people that are listening to it won't, in the fashion industry, you can't patent anything. You can only really trademark your brand. So your brand really needs to be strong from the start. And we made a conscious decision to spend some money on it, knowing that it will probably evolve over time. But what we don't want to be doing is like completely having to reinvent ourselves 12 months in, because we've, not spent proper money on it to begin with. that's our most valuable thing. It's the brand. So let's focus on that. So we put in about 50K between myself and my co-founder to start with. Some of that was from savings, some of that was for loan from my dad and Julian's granny. Not a huge amount, it was 7.5K from each of them. But that got us off the ground, that got us moving. And then we raised some money in June or July, I think it was, last year, to sort of take us to the next stage. We went straight into a shop. We sort of did things slightly differently. I think you've got two ways of growing a fashion brand. You either grow very slowly and organically and you buy X amount of stock, and then once you sold through that, you then buy more stock. But again, because we're going through this no stock holding model, we wanted to be a bit more aggressive with it. We're both quite ambitious. We wanted to be like, okay, let's just like give this a proper go. Let's back ourselves to be able to convince some people to back us, which we managed to do. So we raised 275K, and then we're just closing out another round now. We're raising 700K. So it's like been nice, good incremental growth. We've proven the concept, and now it's like got loads of learnings. Let's go and put them into action and take it to the next level.
I want to unpack the process a little bit, just to share, for you to share with our listeners on how does it actually work for you to, do you buy the fabric beforehand? You get the orders. Do you get the orders? How long does it take? How long do you get the orders for before you start producing the stuff? Just unpack that process from actually putting a batch into, creation.
Yeah. Good question. So when we first launched, we were launching in like a drop model. So we had 3 collections a year. Well, that was the goal. We'd launch it. You'd have 2 or 3 weeks to buy into it as a consumer, and then we'd shut it and go and produce those. And then there'd be a wait. It's about 3 months before the next one. We realized that model didn't really work for us because, like, in order for that to work, you need demand to outweigh supply. That doesn't just happen overnight. We sort of like naively and potentially arrogantly just thought like, oh, we'll just launch a new thing and everyone will know about it and want to buy it. But really, it's like you're buying something that you're having to wait for. There's no reviews. There's no consumer trust. There's no like, am I being scammed here? It's quite a high upfront cost. Really, it's like as a one-off payment. The value is huge, but it's still 395 quid that you've got to drop out your bank account. Like that's quite a risky thing to do, and there's no validation for the business. And it's a sort of product that's not an impulse purchase. It's like you want to think about it. You want to find your right color. So we changed the model and moved to a more seasonal, a bit more of a traditional fashion model where we went for a spring, summer and an autumn, winter. So we moved into that model in November, and that's been the best thing we've ever done. It's allowed us to generate revenue all year round rather than for like 3 months of the year, or actually it was less than that. It was about 6 weeks of the year, which is like stupid retrospectively. So yeah, and how the model works now is across that 6 months, you can buy at any point and your suit will arrive 4 to 8 weeks later. So that's how the consumer sees it. Internally, from the business perspective, we collate orders over the course of the month. And at the end of the month, we'll then place the order with our manufacturer, who's in London, and it takes them 4 weeks to then make the order. Or that's the sort of like lead time from placing the order to getting it back in the shop.
So you manufacture in London?
Yeah, we manufacture in London, which is quite cool, actually. I'm quite proud of that.
Wow.
I can say that, yeah.
It's impressive.
So yeah, it's made in London. We used to be made in Portugal, but we needed to be like more, it was always an ambition to make in the UK, but there aren't that many factories. So we needed to sort of prove a concept. Portugal is amazing, but it's just that much further away. All my learnings from being in operations, which is my background, is and operations in consumer goods, is that if you want stuff to be done, you need to be visible. You need to be at the factory. You need to like show face. You need to start building a relationship, not just with the general manager, but with each individual on the line. And that's when things get done, when they can see you and they're like, okay, I'm working on this jacket now, but I know who I'm working on it for. And they smiled at me and they said, thank you. And it's the way in small manufacture, it's small like startup manufacture, you have to be present. So
how often do you go to the factory?
Not as much as I'd like to be completely honest. Like we're a team of 3 trying to do a lot, so we're a bit stretched, but twice a month probably. But ultimately I'd like to be going once a week. So, but yeah, it's really important. I think it's like, that'd be a huge bit of advice that I would give to anyone in any consumer goods industry, but fashion is especially, is just like start building those relationships, be present. So yeah, from a model perspective, we used to do what's called garment dyeing, where you get a plain fabric, make it into a garment, and then you dye it in a big washing machine. That would have been the most sustainable way to operate, because we could buy it, you know, what we'd know to be the right amount of greige in one color, and then we released a pink suit, for example, that we knew wasn't going to sell as well as the blue suit, which I'm wearing, but was quite a cool sort of showcase for the brand. But it meant that, you know, if we only sold 20 or 50, it didn't matter. If we only sold 5, it didn't matter. We'd only dye 5 of them. But the issue with that is when it goes into the washing machine, it shrinks. You add in the right amount of shrinkage, you test it, you add in the right amount of shrinkage, and then it shrinks to the right size, in theory. But we had a really unfortunate sort of like freak mistake where it should be the same shrinkage across a whole run of fabric. Turned out we had different shrinkage across each roll of fabric, which is unheard of. So some suits came back the right size, half of them were too big, some of them were too small. So we had to like fight the fires, send the ones that we thought we could get away with, or that would fit well enough, or that were the right size, send a load of it back to the factory to either be resized or remade. So they did it, and the ones that they had to remake, they tested each roll of fabric for the shrinkage, and then did it on a roll by roll basis. So like much more drawn out process, but
wow,
the way to do it. And then we found out that there was different shrinkage within the same roll. So the center of the roll had more shrinkage than the outside of the roll, because of how it was wound. So the whole thing was just a disaster. And at that point, we realized like this is creating more wastage, more effort, more back and forth from the factory. Like this doesn't work. So we then started going into yarn dye, same fabric, but dyeing the fabric first. And actually it gave a much higher quality product. Didn't have as many,
a bit more manageable and controllable.
But how do you do it now when you have made to order with the material to meet MOQs? So you do projections for how much you think you're going to sell, and you order that in advance and have at the factory?
Exactly. So we decided that the better way to do it was to have this better quality fabric, because it's not had to go through a big washing machine. And we'll buy X amount up front, so in each color, but let's go for some more conservative colors. Let's go for colors that we know will sell. We don't need to be doing pink suits. It's cool, it's nice, but like it doesn't work. So let's veer away from that. So yeah, we'll buy the material up front, and then know that if we don't sell through it, there's loads of stuff you can do with leftover material. You know, it's a really amazing material. It's from Italy. It's probably one of the biggest features of the product. So comfortable. So we're like, okay, cool. You know, you can make a tote bag, or you can make whatever out of it. There's other ways to use up the material. To date, we haven't had to do that because we've sold through everything. So that's been great. Like as we grow, there'll be more limitations with it, as you're trying to predict how much you're going to sell, or you know, it's nice to be in a position where you're sold out, but that's not great for the business and business growth. And if you get your maths wrong, or your predictions wrong, then that causes its own issues. But those will be problems to come, no doubt. It's just nice to know that you've got a really high quality product that fits. That's the most important thing.
Let's dive deeper a little bit into the manufacturing, because of course, finding a manufacturer that actually wants to work on this business model is not easy, because they can't plan. They can't. It's a nightmare for them, and they don't. Yeah, there's just so many issues from a manufacturing perspective. How did you find them? How did you make them agree to this? How did you, just talk about the manufacturing collaboration that you have and how this works so people can understand it?
Yeah, I think some of it's like luck. You make your own luck, don't get me wrong. But to find the manufacturer in Portugal, I found a directory and had I think it was something like 700 different jacket manufacturers in Portugal. So I'm like going through this list, trying to work out which one's which. And after a while, I'd found 2 that I was quite happy with. I was like, right, let's stop there. Let's go and explore these 2. So we went out to visit. One was like terrible, really bad experience. Went to the factory, not great working conditions, lumped us with a bill for some samples that they'd made that we hadn't asked for. As soon as we sat down, it was like, what the fuck's going on here? So we were actually quite cheeky. We put the samples on. They were actually good samples. They were well made. They looked great. So put the samples on, took a few photos, gave them back to them and said, look, we can't take them now, so you can send them to us if you want. And did a runner. And then went to the other factory, and it was an amazing experience and incredible working conditions, really beautiful factory, really progressive. They were manufacturing for Ralph Lauren and Massimo Dutti and some huge brands, and we suddenly felt like we were in really safe hands. And we were kind of like, why are they talking to us? But the luck was that the guy that we were working with was really young. It was a family business. He'd just done his industrial engineering degree. This was kind of his project to go and take on. So we resonated quickly because we were similar age.
He loved you, basically.
Yeah,
Take your idea.
We just got on well, and it was like the right timing for him. They wanted to be progressive. There's a really interesting mindset that they had to manufacturing, which was, we've got this, production line where people are producing 4,000 jackets for Ralph Lauren, let's say, and it's very repetitive. So how can we keep them engaged and interested? Suddenly you've got a pink chore jacket that's totally different to what they're normally producing going down the line. They get some thinking, and they have to think like, okay, how am I doing this? This is different. I need to change things. It's not just repetitive. So it was their way of keeping them engaged. I think also as a manufacturer, you see how much waste there is. It's not like, that you're sort of part of the problem. And I think there's like a need and a want to try and do something different. And how can we change this? And it's like the social purpose, which everyone has internally, versus like the business purpose of how can we make money? How do we keep this running? Margins are getting thinner. People are being pushed left, right, and center. But we can come in with a different perspective that's like, we don't need to push you on your margins because we're not fighting for every percent, for this constant cash flow. We're having to account for all this wastage that's going on. It's like very fraught. So we can give a different angle that it's like, okay, you might not have this consistency and you might not, be able to predict your orders and your runs, but this is a much calmer way of operating. The pressure that we put on is like, there's a time window and we need you to hit that, because if you don't hit it, then we're then having problems to work with ourselves. And manufacturing doesn't always go that way. And in fact, more often than not, something goes wrong. It's just part and parcel of it. So we counteract that by adding in some contingency time and our lead time, etc. It's always better to be able to, deliver in 6 weeks rather than tell people you're going to deliver in 6 and deliver in 12. So I think sorry, I'm waffling a little bit, but going back to the original point, one, it was like building a good relationship to be like, we are trying to do something different. We're two young guys. We're not super arrogant. We're open to listening to your suggestions. Probably again, the other superpower of not coming from the fashion industry, where it's like, you need to do it like this because this is how to do it. It's like, here's a cool idea. How do you think we should do it? How do you think we should? Have you got any suggestions? Have we got the collar right on this jacket? And I think that really empowers people, and it's a different way of approaching things and work.
Collaborative effort.
Yeah, and I like that. It sounds so smart, and it's a good idea also that you went and visited the factory so early on in the process. You would have seen those working conditions if you didn't go.
No.
And your social responsibility and you think about sustainability is important for your brand story. If you don't do this, you will miss out, and it can hit you like, when shit hits the fan later on. And just knowing, and then also like how you thought it, just as you said, as a collaboration, when you don't just send something away over an email asking to do something, but just discussion with them. How can we do this? Can we do this in a better way? We are thinking about this with your experience. How can you bring this? That must have been really valuable for you to do that early on in the process.
Yeah. And I think if I'm being totally honest, like for me, it's like, look at bad working conditions and I'm not like, I've got social purpose to change this. Like, I would love to say that I am, but I'd be lying if I was. I look at it and I'm like, how are you going to possibly do a good job if you're working 12 hours a day in tight conditions with no natural daylight? Like, it just doesn't work. And I would rather not be in a position where I'm like, yes, I've managed to wangle an amazing price with this manufacturer and like my margins look great, and then it comes to it and you're sending half of it back because the stitch is missing or the quality is bad, or you're sending it out to customers and it falls apart and then it comes back to you and the whole reputation just gets ruined. So it's like, I think this is where this is like how we'll make a difference in the world, and how like the world will make a difference is when people stop looking at it as in like, I'm a green warrior, I need to make a social purpose. And it's like, why don't you look at this and how it's going to make you more profit, or how it's going to make you more revenue, or how you're going to have a better relationship with your customers? Like there's a whole nother lens to look at things, which isn't like, oh, do you know what? Like, I'm not that sustainable, and like all I'm here for is to drive profits. Like, cool, whatever, great, happy for you. Let's look at how you're actually going to drive that profit, and let's look at the other mechanisms, the markers that go into that, and not solely into social justice and environmental purpose. And like let's put a whole nother business lens on this. And that's when I think it becomes much more attainable. That's how you're going to get it across to the board, or when you've suddenly got, you know, I've been half bought out by a BlackRock or a big company, that's their pressure is from their shareholders to be like, you need to derive us more value here. It's like, well, we can get you more value, and actually we can also have a positive impact on the world, but value is the first thought, and the positive impact is the nice added benefit of that, rather than being like your value is going to be derived from pushing margins, and all that ends up happening is, you know, you have a shit product.
So true. And what is that? How did you transition from the Portuguese factory to the UK factory? And how did you work together with them to arrive to the model that you together have today?
Yeah, so I think it was partly need, where we'd just gone through this like real issue with shrinkage going wrong, and again, it was actually nothing to do with the factory, and they were super helpful and took a lot of responsibility. And you know, lots of factories wouldn't have. They'd kind of just be like, it wasn't our problem, it's the fabrics issue. And it's like, well, it is to a certain extent, but like, let's put some more markers in place. So they were amazing. I have literally no bad words to say about them, but we really struggled being so far away and so out of control. And maybe that's a control freak thing, I don't know, but we wanted to be more in control. So we started looking at factories in London, and we were expecting it to be significantly more expensive. As it turned out, it wasn't the volumes that we were looking at. Like when you start getting to bigger volumes,
yeah,
Portugal can way exceed what London can, because they just have much more manpower and the facility to do that. But in the short term, it was like, okay, well, we'll pay marginally more, but not loads, probably save a bit on transport costs. So we started searching and just found a company on Google again, like world's best tool. I got in touch, went to visit, explained what we were doing. Nice to be able to have a bit of, it probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been selling already. Like if we just gone with this new idea and there's no validation, like we're asking them to take a big risk, whereas we were in a position to be like, look, we can not far off guarantee you X amount of orders per month. It will go up and down month per month, but if you average it out across the year, it's going to be this, and we're right early days, so we can grow to this, this, and this. And again, you know, there's capacity at the factory. They'd worked on lots of menswear products before, and young British brands that had done well and grown and could see the potential growth in it, believed in this idea. And so the transition was pretty smooth. Like there's always teething issues. You know, your first samples come back. And we made a point of like, okay, well, here's our pattern. Here's an example of something we've already made. Go and make it. And they did, and it was pretty good. And actually, the nice thing was like, again, each time you get better because everyone's got another viewpoint and another interest. Like, oh, I wouldn't. It's quite funny when you're like talking factory, and they're like, well, I wouldn't have done it like that. That's stupid. And you're just like almost laughing. It's like, okay, cool. Well, let's try it like that and let's see how it goes. But everyone thinks they know best. So yeah, we did, and just made some micro improvements, and they actually introduced us to a new pattern cutter, a new grader, which was great, and they made some significant improvements. And yeah, I think it's just that, like, I don't know if you've heard the Japanese phrase Kaizen, but constant improvement, and we very much lean into that. And if someone's got a suggestion, like, we'll give it a go and see how it comes out. So yeah, it was a relatively simple, easy transition, made easier by the fact that it's 45 minutes from, you know, home or the shop, so we can go
Fantastic.
Go and be there. It's not like hoping that things go right, because they don't. But if you're there on site and be like, this has gone wrong, what do you want us to do?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we'll do this. Or like,
And
oh,
when
actually,
you
it doesn't really matter that much. No one's going to notice. It's fine. Let's just push on so we can be on time or whatever.
and when you launched 2022, you started D2C, right? But you pretty soon open up a retail store. So how soon did you do that? It sounds pretty quick. How did you start out approaching the market?
Yeah, good question. So we originally launched D2C, but at launch we did a 2-day pop-up where we just like got all of our samples out, got loads of drinks brands. So thankfully I used to work in the drinks industry, so I had lots of friends to be able to send us free drinks and whatnot. Got some DJs and just did this 2-day launch kind of party, I guess. And we quickly realized how important it was for people to be able to touch, try, feel the product. Especially doing made to order, especially, as I said, like made to order is an interesting one because it's not something, it negates what a lot of people do in the fashion space, including myself at times, where I buy like the same item in 3 different sizes or 3 different colors and then keep one and send the rest back. Or actually a lot of the time I'm not very good at sending stuff back, so I just end up with more stuff than I wanted, which is my sort of guilt that I'm pushing out of now. But very much before starting a business as well, a fashion business, that was the case. But it negates that. You can't buy it and send it back, or buy 2 different sizes and send it back. So you've got to wait 8 weeks for it to arrive, 4 to 8 weeks for it to arrive. So you just don't do that. So it then became really important for people to try it, find it, feel it, find the right size, etc. And it was a huge success. So, right, okay, cool. That was great. First collection done. Then we moved on to our second batch. This is when we were operating on this slightly different model. Mm-hmm. And we were like, let's get a 10-day pop-up. Let's do it over 10 days. So we started looking at the different facilitators for that. We've got Appear here as a good company, and there are a few other ones that will be able to link you with pop-up spaces. And annoyingly, though, they're all really expensive because there's lots of companies to make the margin, and it's fair enough, and it's an amazing business. But I was looking at it, I was like, this is going to cost us a fortune. So I have a mate that works in retail property, sent him a message and said, do you know anyone that does pop-up spaces? And he's like, to be honest, not really. Like, I'm more put people in long-term leases, but why don't you chat to Spitalfields Market? So we did. He linked us up. Again, the timing was right. They had a few empty spaces that they fill with big brands that take 5 to 10 year leases, but that probably takes 6 months to get signed off. So rather than have an empty shop for 6 months, we come in and cover their costs and pay their service charge and business rates that they would be losing if it was empty, and slot in on this short-term lease. And suddenly we realized we're like, we can have this 1-2 month shop for not far off the same price that this 10-day pop-up was going to cost us. So we're like, yeah, we'll do it. Great. Sign this pop-up lease, go into this 1,000 square foot space and like walk in, and we're suddenly like, oh fuck, what have we done? It's huge empty space and we've got no budget to go and fill it and no time before we're about to release this new collection. And suddenly like penny dropped. Like, oh, maybe we've made a bit of a mistake here actually.
Big dance floor for the launch party.
Yeah, and we're like,
one rack in the middle.
Great, we've got a couple of racks and not enough suits to fill the space. And so yeah, we just saw then when you've got no money and you've got no time, you just find a way to make things work. And actually in many ways, it's like the best thing that can happen to you is having no money and time, because it forces you to get creative. So thankfully we built quite a cool brand at that stage. Like I said, we made some good choices early doors, like investing money into the brand. So I think we spent 12k on our branding agency at the time. But again, we sort of hustled that really hard by dangling this carrot of this opportunity to work with this new made to order brand and redefining the suit. And that's quite an exciting project for a branding agency because it's very different to their day to day, or it's quite disruptive. So we had this cool brand to work with, and then just started reaching out to loads of other brands. And it's funny, right, how much you can get if you just ask. So, we reached out to a paint brand, and a brand called Yes Colours, who are amazing, and they were right early in their journey as well, now doing some really cool stuff. The massive sustainability message behind what they were doing, and said, look, we've got the shop, we need some paint.
Oh, for the walls and the
can you give us some paint? And in return, like, we'll shout about you on our socials, and if you want, we'll put up a vinyl on the wall that says this paint's from Yes Colours. So they did, and then bought some paintbrushes and started painting the walls, and reached out to a store designer who, again, like, lucky timing, got introduced to him, and he'd just gone from working for an agency for 10 years to starting his own studio. So he was very early.
You did some case studies.
So he not for free, but he helped us out for way less than what he would normally charge. And this whole world started to come together, and reached out to furniture companies and, you know, said, look, we're doing this project. Have you got any furniture that you want to display, or have you got some furniture you can lend us? And so we ended up just putting this shop together with basically next to no budget.
Fantastic.
I think the whole fit out cost us something like 10k in total, which for us at the time was like huge amounts of money. But some of the like shop design people who went to were like, we've got 10k to do it, and they're like, no, don't even bother, it's not happening. So yeah, we managed to hustle it through and build this beautiful store. Actually, it came out really well, and tried to look at it from a slightly different angle of, like, a lot of people say the high street's dead, but don't believe it's dead, just believe there's a lot of dead shops filling the high street. And actually consumers are really still thirsting for experience, and they want to be able to engage with brands, and lots of brands just don't do it, or they'll just like throw some clothes in the shop and make it look pretty, but it's like there's not really any purpose to it, there's not really any intention, which is a word we use a lot as a brand, and starting to use more and more, is like intention. Let's do everything with intent. Let's design stores with intent. Let's make sure that people are coming into the shop with intent. So yeah, we got a store 6 months into launching, which, like, again, if you were to speak to anyone in the fashion space, be like, what the hell are you doing? That's a terrible idea. But we just did what felt right, and it just sort of all came together. And thankfully, like, it was a gamble, and it's very easy to sit here and be like, yeah, that was a really great decision, but it was a sort of like, there's some intuition, there was intention, like I said, behind it, but we're lucky that it paid off for us, and it was like the best thing that we've ever done. But I could easily have not be sat here having this conversation with you, and it hadn't worked, and we'd spent all our money and been like, cool, well, there you go, that was fun, good project. So yeah, I think there's, like, worth caveating that whilst I'd love to sit here and say I'm a genius and business genius, and it's not to say that I'm not proud of it, and I think we did make some good decisions, and but yeah, there is a nice healthy dose of right time, right place.
So would you recommend other brands doing the same, opening up their own shop? I think the alternative would be going with established retailers that have their own customer base from the beginning. Or did you find a spot where there's good foot traffic? Or how did you, because when you open your own shop, you really have to find your new customer base yourself, right? So did you ever have that internal discussion? Okay, should we really open our purely own shop?
We don't have that as an option yet, because we're made to order. Like, we don't have a wholesale model. Mm-hmm. I think there is, like, long term, there is potential to wholesale, but it's a lot more difficult because staff have to be trained. You have to explain the story. People have to understand that they're waiting 4 to 8 weeks. They have to understand why as well. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So it's a longer term project. And ultimately, like, long term, I think I really do believe in made to order in the fashion space. I think that is the future. It has to be, because we're running out of resources. But short to that, and from a wholesale buyer's perspective, it's like a dream come true in many ways. Like, if there's a consumer base to come and buy it, because you're not having to be like, whoa, finger in the air, how many shoes am I going to buy for this season? And can I negotiate a sale or return? And if I can't, then I've got excess stock and I've got to discount it. And you know, there's probably a whole another channel of conversation there. But so because that wasn't an option to us, it was like, well, there's only one way to do this, to get our own store. And answer to your question, yeah, I would. I think if you have the ability to test out retail through a wholesale model, then that would be a good option. But I do think there's real value in having your own space or a shared space. So if maybe getting your own space isn't an option, it's like, are there some other similar brands that are, I was going to say non-competitive, but they don't even necessarily have to be non-competitive, because I think there's a huge wealth in bringing the same customer down to the shop. It's kind of how we shop. Like, you go to a certain area or certainly in London, like, you go to a menswear area. You go to a few different shops, and the only reason you've made that commitment to going out and shopping is because you want to go and test out a few different products. Like, it's pretty rare that you're just going out shopping, you're going to go to one shop. It's like, I think because like it can be quite stressful, it can be quite draining. Like, you make a commitment to going shopping, so you're going shopping, you're going to make a day of it or a half day of it or whatever. Occasionally, if you really need something specific, you'll go to one shop and then just be done with it. But generally, I think people go out and go on shopping experiences and journeys. And so, like, as and when you're looking for a space, being next to other competitive brands is a bonus, not necessarily a negative. So I think that's a good mindset to have with it. But
You want the traffic. You want the people coming there. I want to drive the conversation because you already mentioned branding and how important branding has been for you. And I think to invest already from the beginning in your brand and in the branding package and to work with an agency, I think it's genius because many startups, they're like, oh, I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to make the logo myself. Yeah, well, we'll invest in this later. I think the way you did it is most probably one reason for your success, to actually do it properly from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that, and then how you intentionally apply and work with the branding.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's like not far off 100% the reason for our success. Like, if I look back at our journey today and how many doors we've unlocked by having a cool brand, and like, we've done really well with influencers, for example, and we don't have a huge following. People aren't landing on our Instagram page and being like, oh, these guys are validated because there's 50,000, 100,000 followers. People are like, this looks cool. That's great. So from the start, and there's a world and it all makes sense. But not always. Like, we're still testing and learning with lots of different sort of angles, and we're still developing our voice and whatnot. But we've got something to look at, this visually aesthetic that's appealing, and a good product to go with it. So like, product and brand are without doubt the two reasons for all of the other things that have happened to us have been unlocked by having a strong product and a strong brand. And I think those are the two key things to focus on from the start. And also, like, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be like 90% great. I think sometimes people get stopped because they're looking for this like perfect thing that doesn't exist, and you can't get to perfect without being in the world and learning and adapting and whatnot. But it does require focus. So yeah, from us, like, I think it's really important to have a strong brand strategy and to know, like, think about why your product is going to be used and what people need it for and what problem you're solving. I think, like, there's a great book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why, which you guys as branders will know about. But it's really important. Like, there's so many products out in the world at the moment, like, especially over COVID, a lot of people changed their careers and got this thirst to start a business and had time to start a business as well. And the barriers to starting things are really low because there's so much information out there and there's so many places to go. And I think it will contract, but we're at a point in time now where, like, the brand and products and business world is sort of almost overgrown itself. That, like, there's a million and one things for a consumer to see, buy, whatever. It's like paid social is not really working in the same way it used to because there's about 15 million ads that you come across every day. I think it's like, if you go on your phone, it's like 1 in every 4 posts is an ad, and you won't realize it until you actually look at it. But we're just becoming numb to new products and new businesses. And so in order to break through that noise, you need to have a why, you need to have a purpose, you need to know who you're going after, know why you're going after them, try and work out how you're going to talk to that person and why they would buy your product over someone else's and why it fits into their life. So that's how we started the journey. We actually, before that, to find our branding agency, we did what's called a request for proposal. So we put together a nice little deck, and like, it was a really, really smart thing to do. Again, on one of those things on reflection, you're like, moments in time that make a real difference, rather than going out into the world with, like, the way that you do that without that. It's just like, I don't know, write an email and be like, this is what we're trying to create. We didn't have a product yet, so you can't show anyone anything, which makes it much more difficult. You can't be like, look at this cool product that we've made. Do you want to come and make the brand for us? When we're shooting for agencies that we shouldn't be shooting for because we know we can't afford them. But we put together a deck, like a 10-page deck, which had some initial thinking in, which had like a bit of our business plan and model, which had our why, and just like actually got a friend that does a little bit of graphic design on the side. We're like, can you make this look pretty? So they did. And then suddenly you're reaching out to people and like immediately there's a different relationship and narrative in that what's the words, relationship or conversation, because people are looking at it and they're like, okay, cool, these guys, they're like, you know, as a brander, the worst thing is like someone not knowing what they want. And so you can give people ideas, but like, you know that it's just going to be ever changing and actually just becomes this massively frustrating thing. And like, you don't need to know exactly what you want, but you need to give someone direction. It's like giving someone a blank canvas and being like, draw. It's like, well, draw what? It's like, you say, can you draw an elephant? And suddenly like, that's much easier. And you can start to get creative around that elephant and how that looks, but you've got a direction. So I think that was one of the best things we did. And then put together a spreadsheet of loads of different agencies and asked lots of people, like, is there anyone that you'd recommend or you work with or whatever? And then had this hit list and sent it out to, I think it was probably about 20 different agencies in the end.
Oh, wow.
Probably heard back from 12, which we were quite happy with. Started whittling it down slowly but surely, got people to pitch, had conversations, had calls, but it then suddenly changed the narrative from us going out to people being like, we need you to work with us, to being like, you need us to work with you. So because we had this options, because we had this list of 12 people that we started a conversation with, it meant that we could go into this conversation with much more confidence, which changed the outcome of who we then started working with. And so yeah, we managed to get this whole brand strategy and propositioning and well done for 12k, which shouldn't have cost. We reached out to agencies.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. We reached out to agencies that were like, I love what you're doing. This is really cool, and you guys are onto something, and we'd love to work with you, but our fees start 150. We're like, okay.
You're like, bye.
Really cool.
But putting so much effort into the branding side, how did you then attract your first customers, and how did you grow from after attracting your first customers when we talk about marketing wise?
Yeah, let's not pull the wool over anyone's eyes. Your first customers are your friends and family, always.
Yeah.
In any business, because they're the people that trust you, they're the people that back you, they're the people that, like, you know, if we're talking about my business specifically, know that they're waiting 4 to 8 weeks, but I will deliver it, because if not, they know where to find me. Like,
you're gonna meet them for Christmas.
Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, the first customers are always friends and family. That was like the initial starting point, and then you start looking at the various channels that are available to you, your different social channels, TikToks, Instagrams. For us, our biggest channel has always been LinkedIn. It's huge. I think it's quite an untapped channel for what we're selling, fashion. And it's valid for us to go and sell what we're selling because it works nicely in a business environment. And, you know, like if you to look at the difference between a mailing list and a LinkedIn connection, like you get someone in your mailing list, chance of them opening, we actually have quite a high, saying this, we have quite a high open rate, but like it doesn't lead to a huge amount of sales for us, because I think, again, people are very numb to email marketing. Like, how many spam emails do you get? We've now got all of the email providers who've got auto filters that will send it straight into a promotional channel that, like, I don't know, it takes a certain kind of person to go through their promotional folder and like read each email, right? Yeah. So it's like you're fighting for this huge space that you can't get into. I would far rather have a LinkedIn connection that I can then slowly, through osmosis, start bringing into my world, start selling to them, start validating myself, start validating the business. That's not always selling to you. Like, I chat quite a lot of shit on LinkedIn, to be honest. Like, you know, one day I'm talking about how much I love my dog, but it becomes personable then. And it's like, it's got nothing to do with Suze. It's got nothing to do with me, but they see my name and they see Batch London and they're like, oh, I love my dog too. So like, there's a connection that we've got there. And then when I then start posting about like, here's our new collection, or, you know, last week to get your order by X, and people start to listen, where you start to build this brand world. And it's actually almost exactly the same as doing email marketing. It's just on a different channel, but it's much more noticeable. And, you know, it's that social media that we can all excuse sitting at work, you know, watching it, right?
You talked about in the beginning that you did a launch event. Do you do any offline marketing today to attract customers?
Yeah, loads. That's the facility. Like, the best thing about having a physical store is it allows us to do stuff like that. So actually, we've been in 3 shops in the last, whatever it is now, 18 months. Because of this short-term lease, we've had to move around to a few different ones, which has been stressful, but it's always quite nice to have a new sort of space and energy. But our last 2 shops have been quite big. So like 1,000 square foot. One was nearly 2,000 square foot across 2 floors. Second shop, we built a secret hidden speakeasy bar in our basement that you had to go through a wardrobe to get to, which was quite fun.
That's cool.
Fantastic.
It was really cool, but we used it about 4 times. It's kind of a waste of time and effort. But yeah, we do loads of stuff. So we've done 26 different live music events. We did a tattoo flash day. We did a whiskey tasting. Yeah, we've done lots of sort of business and networking events, all just ways of bringing people into our world. When we started the business, we didn't want to just make clothing. We wanted to make a brand. We wanted our clothing to stand for more than just the item that it is. Like, who do you become when you put it on? What does it mean? What emotions do you feel, etc.? So in order to build that, you need to have a lifestyle around your brand and attach value to that, rather than just sort of being an empty phrase and statement. So a big way for us to do that was to host lots of events, and we probably burnt ourselves out doing it. Like, it's a double-edged sword. You know, we're trying to, team of 3, we're trying to run a shop, an e-commerce store, do like 3, 4, 5 events a week. Suddenly you're like, and you forget that you have to work weekends as well, because the shop's got to be open over the weekend. We're taking Mondays off. So it's like 6-day working week. And yeah, so it was hardcore. Don't get me wrong. And there's a much more sustainable way of doing it. It's part of the reason we kind of, one, our newer shops much smaller, so it doesn't quite lend itself as well to running lots of events. But 2, we needed to recharge a bit and reset and actually focus in on selling suits. And we've done loads of building the brand, and that was cool. But like, now let's focus on selling for a bit. And so there's a bit of a sort of pendulum or seesaw, as it were, that will come back to an equilibrium where we can focus on both things at the same time, grow the team a bit, actually moving to a big flagship store, fingers crossed, touch wood, in Covent Garden.
Nice.
Will facilitate us doing this. And big thing for us is community. And that's one of our key sales channels, is like, how do we nurture a community? Word of mouth is your cheapest acquisition cost by far. And getting your existing customers to come back and buy more is a really strong way of growing your revenue. So building a community allows us to do that. We call it the Batch Members Club, which if you buy an item, you become a part of. So this new shop will be the Batch Members Club and be the facility to come and do lots of offline marketing. And we've done a few other bits outside of that, so not just events and store. We've made 2 newspapers, and had that for people that came to the events to take away, that took you into our little brand world that was like very tangible and physical, and you could suddenly tell a whole story because someone's going to sit there and read it, rather than like a 10-second Instagram video, which probably won't go into your head whatsoever, and look pretty. So you could sit like on a coffee table and become a feature. And that was really cool. It was quite expensive and time consuming, and didn't always get rid of all the newspapers. So we had some left over, which fights against sustainability, but you know, all a sort of process. We enveloped loads of them up and sent them out to different agencies and people and figures that we thought could be interested in what we're doing. So yeah, we've done quite a few different little bits and pieces like that. But I think there's a lot to be said about using physical marketing to expand your digital world and bring people into your brand and create. We've got past this world of like mass marketing and like getting hundreds of thousands of followers and organically, and actually, like, I think the key to future success in sort of modern day and where we are now is building super fans. So rather than having loads of people that kind of know about you, it's like, let's have a much smaller group of people that really fucking love what you're doing, that are really ingrained in the brand. Because otherwise you're just competing with too much attention that we don't have any of anymore.
And again, the community is something that's always going to support you. 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now, they're going to grow old with you and bring other people. Word of mouth is the biggest marketing there is and the most powerful.
Yeah.
And also in today's digital world, going physical is just different, and people remember it just because it is different. And that's why also it's even more impactful. But I want to go into, because you mentioned, of course, you've worked a lot, you're only 3 people, into the work-life balance, which doesn't exist. But I just want to unpack that a little bit. What does that mean to you? How does that look like? Because I'm sure you're working 24/7.
No, in fairness, it actually kind of does exist. Like I haven't perfected it yet, but we're quite strict as a team, and it's nice because everyone's in the same headspace, and I think that's important. Like if you've got one person that's working till midnight, no one else is, that creates a sort of a rift and a divide. But we're all pretty good at, like, the workday finishes at 6:30. Occasionally there's more stuff to do and you need to just grit your teeth and get on with it, but like by and large that's when the workday finishes, and like shut your laptops and, you know, go and spend time with friends and family and partners and whatever it is. And I think you have to set your boundaries. Like no one else will tell you to do it. It's very easy to overwork. We did burn ourselves out because suddenly the workday didn't finish at 6:30, but they finished at 11:30 because you'd done a live music event. And it was cool. And it was like, you know, one of those things that if I wasn't, I would go to after work. So the fact that didn't have to go anywhere, it was just where I am is great, but it's always like different when you're hosting and you've got to pack down and all of that sort of stuff. But it's the balance is super important. And I know everyone talks about it, and it's like work-life balance is something that's like thrown out there as this like phrase that doesn't really mean anything. And I think it's also important to recognize that like that's not always achievable. Sometimes you need to just pull your socks up and get on with it. And it might be like 2, 3, 4 month sprint where you just have to, like, there's just a period of time you just got to get it done, which is fine. But then you've got to plan in the rest afterwards. And like, that's where it gets difficult. That's the challenge, is like,
to actually do it. To actually
down.
Go to Bali for 2 weeks and just chill.
Yeah. And slowing down and giving yourself the mental freedom and guilt-free time to take away. And it's hard. And it's also hard, as you know, if there's lots of founders listening, like being on a founder's salary, and it's all well and good being like, you know, now's your time to slow down and go and take 2 weeks in Bali. And it's like, well, with what money? Do you know what I mean? So that is a challenge. And I think it's like, don't think anyone's really got the answer yet. And I think it's very individual to each person, but I think there are some like key things that make up that recharging. It's like eating good food, doing exercise. I think one that's always missed a lot of the time is like, you need to socialize. And it's so easy to like be too tired, be too run down, have spent too much of your day socializing, because that's very much what it's like in a new business, because you're talking to people the whole time. But not having those connections, and whether that's like with family, with friends, whatever, it's really, really important. You can go and socialize and you don't need to have, you know, 6 pints and then wake up with a sore head the next day. You can actually go and not drink. Or if you like having a drink, go and have a couple of drinks. Or if you want to go and get smashed, do it. And you need to do these things occasionally, and you'll hate yourself the next day. But like, it's a really important part of that process and cycle. Otherwise you just end up, it's a very lonely thing to be in a small business. No one ever really understands quite what you're going through, or that's how it feels anyway. But actually it's like, you just have to push through that barrier. Socializing is massively important.
Now, a couple of years into the business, what have been your biggest challenges so far in the business?
Good question. I think we've been quite lucky that we haven't had loads of like really major challenges, or maybe it's that we just got a slightly different mindset with it, that we're quite good at just getting on with it and overcoming it. Growth is always a challenge. Proving concept is always a challenge. We had a couple of those production issues, which I kind of mentioned earlier, and that represented a huge challenge. But as things have gone, like, things have been relatively smooth sailing, and they've kind of gone in the right direction. But yeah, balancing out that, like, how much money do we need to raise? How fast are we growing? Do those two things align? Can we convince people to come on board? Challenge, I think, yeah. And outside of that, probably our biggest challenge is managing workload. And like, like I said, we're a team of 3 and we're trying to do a lot. And then you add raising money on top, which is basically like a full-time job on top of a full-time job. So yeah, working out how to manage that workload, working out where to spend your time, energy and attention. And it's always a balancing act. Like, you start investing more time into raising money and your sales drop, because there's a really direct correlation between how much time me and Julian can put into pushing sales, which is now being put into raising money, and you need sales to raise money, and so it's all just a big balancing act. But yeah, I think we've been, like I said, because we focused on the right things from the start, which was good brand, good product, that's made a lot of the rest of the business a lot easier than if we hadn't done that. And I think product's so key.
Yep.
What's the most important advice that you'd give another founder?
Good question. I think for me, it would be accept that you might fail. So I think a lot of people get really caught up in this idea that they can't fail, and they're so emotionally attached to their business that if it goes wrong, that's catastrophic and you never recover and whatever. But all that is a limiting belief. All that does is hold you back. And actually, as soon as you accept that you can fail, the chances of you failing are way lower, because suddenly a problem arises, and it's not like this is the end of the world. If I can't get through this, who am I? It's okay, well, that might happen. Of course, that's an option. But what other things can I do to stop that from happening? And you approach it with a much more calm and level head, and you can think more clearly, and you can actually go out and you can go and, it's speak to people and be like, my business might fail. I need some help. People are like, cool, well, let's stop that from happening. Whereas you're too emotionally attached to it, engaged with it, you probably won't tell someone that and pretend that it's all going well, because you need them to give you money so that you can survive and get to the next stage. And actually, people love solving problems. They don't really feeding things that are going really well, so we don't need it. What are you doing?
Entrepreneurship is hard as it is, and going into a product business is even harder, because product is hard. There's a million things that can go wrong, and a lot of them go wrong. So it's just a part of the package, a part of this industry, because shit is happening all the time. So it's just dealing with it.
Looking into the future, what legacy do you hope to leave with Batch?
The legacy that we want to leave is to start to change the way that we consume fashion. And I'd love to say that we'll change it, but it needs way more forces than that. It's too big a beast. But I'd like to leave behind this legacy that we ignited a fire. Or ignited a fire is not quite right, because we're not the first people to do it, but really sort of blew on that fire and gave it some energy and gave it some spark for people to be like, actually, there's a better way of doing things. Actually, this is a better way of shopping. And so I hope that we can start to change consumer habits. That would be, the dream ultimately. And just from a personal perspective, to feel like I've led a purposeful life. Probably won't be what I do forever, but I'm hoping that will be the facilitator to do the next thing, so I can keep blowing on that fire and spreading it and having an impact on the world.
That's fantastic.
What tools, books, podcasts would you recommend, or something that's been really important for you that you've gotten motivation or inspiration from, that's been super helpful for your business? What could those be?
Yeah, and do you know what? It's one of the things that I've recently written down as something that I need to do more of, is read and listen to podcasts and, get my head out the sand to a certain degree. But I've always really loved is Atomic Habits, which I'm sure lots of people have read, but I find that very inspiring, a really good way of sort of setting up my life. I do like Stephen Bartlett's podcast a lot. He gets some good guests on, and he asks lots of
very good.
He's very good at drilling into people and getting people to reveal quite a lot about themselves. And I guess tools, I'm quite a big journaler. I'm not a very good journaler, don't get me wrong, but
physical or digital?
Physical. So I've got a little diary by my bed that every night I try and write 2 gratitudes, 2 affirmations, 2 things I'm proud of, and 2 sort of visions, where do I want to be in the future or whatever. And I just blast through it. I need to give it more time and thought, and I just probably takes me 2 minutes to do it. But it's just a good way, opportunity to put thoughts on paper, opportunity to start building some positive neural pathways, and I don't necessarily do it and then suddenly I'm like, wow, I feel great, let's go to sleep. But I know that like long time over time, it will have an impact because it's impossible for it not to. Next challenge for me is to get a bit more thoughtful with what I'm writing rather than just like breezing through it. But I would recommend it. I think it's a good thing to do.
But also interesting for you to see the growth that you've had, to go back and look at what you wrote and kind of like where you were and where you are now, just to see that it actually works, because it does.
Yeah.
Just like the habit of putting things to paper. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? I haven't done that. I need to go and look back.
Yeah. So where do people find you? Any brand?
Yeah. Socials were at batch.ldn. Website is batchldn.com. That's it.
And you're big on LinkedIn. If people want to connect, I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're going to put all the links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, LinkedIn me up. Like I said, careful though, because I will try and sell to you. But no, I think I offer some value on LinkedIn. Not always, but sometimes. So yeah, if you want to connect and follow the journey, I'd love that.
You do. I always love your posts. Well, this was a extremely inspirational interview, and thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and the path that you've taken. And it's not easy because you're doing it really not the easy way and the traditional route. So it's really good. I'm sure it's going to be very inspiring for people to try this alternative business model, and especially now with what's happening in the fashion industry with all the overconsumption and all the waste and all that. It's like there needs to be a more mindful way. And so I really, and you're showing that it is possible to run a successful business with a slightly different business model.
Yeah, so thank you for that and this discussion.
I agree. And yeah, please do give it a go. You don't need to do like everything made to order, but maybe you could have one style or one collection and just test the waters.
So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys. All the best.
Thank you.